For the majority of Carmelo Anthony's career, he has been the punching bag of TV talking heads and Twitter analysts alike. The biggest criticism that people have always leveled at Melo, as he's affectionately known, is that he's a selfish player. He's carried that tag throughout his career. Many, often using just that label, have blamed him for the failure of every team that he's ever played for. No matter where he has played or what jersey he has worn, he is usually the one shouldering most, if not all of the blame. Even last year, on a team with two other superstars, fingers still pointed squarely Anthony's way when OKC was eliminated in the first round of the playoffs at the hands of the Utah Jazz and Rookie of the Year candidate Donovan Mitchell. But is it really fair to say that Carmelo Anthony is the main reason that teams he's played on have never won a championship? Excluding last year's Thunder squad, Melo has been the go-to guy on every team that he's ever played on. Whether he was leading the Orangemen to their first and only national championship, ending the 8-year playoff drought endured by the Denver Nuggets, or giving the dismal Knicks a playoff berth, Melo has shouldered the burden of carrying the team. And in all of those situations, he has been the only go-to guy. There have been no Dwayne Wades, no Shaquille O'Neals, no Kyrie Irvings, no real Robin to Melo's Batman. He may have had a couple jokers here and there, but no sidekick to complement his greatness. Allen Iverson was a great player in his prime, but by the time he teamed up with Melo in Denver, he was in significant decline and projected hardly a shadow of his former greatness. Some might say that Melo did have a chance to play with Chauncey Billups in Denver. Billups played a pivotal role in the 2004 Pistons championship, but by the time he teamed up with Melo, he was also in steady decline. In his career as a role player, Billups has been sensational. Still, no one has ever said that Billups was a superstar, or that Billups could carry a team. And that's the thing about blaming Melo. Given this lack of a real supporting cast, how can we call Melo selfish for taking most of the shots, or even forcing the offense to run through him? We can go through every roster Melo has ever been on with less than a fine-tooth comb, and never find a big two, no less a big three. At best, Melo had a big one and a couple of halves. And those halves usually didn't complement Melo's game. Instead, they hindered it, like Amari Stoudemire, who played with Anthony on the Knicks for 5 seasons. Stoudemire was great in Phoenix, especially when Steve Nash, arguably one of the greatest assist men in NBA history, was throwing him lobs at the basket. But by the time he reached the Knicks to play with Melo, he too was in serious decline as a basketball player. With weak knees and a skill set limited to dunking the basketball, his worst days often ended with him punching out glass boxes after playoff losses. I think it would be generous to say that during his time with the Knicks, Stoudemire was at least half the player he was in Phoenix. Not that bringing in a big man who was used to being fed the ball by a great point guard or facilitator was some kind of managerial genius. As anyone who knows basketball will tell you, Anthony needs to touch and shoot the ball to be effective. How the Knicks hierarchy believed that Stoudemire, with his limited skill set, would be a good fit to play with Anthony is anyone's guess. And that brings us to the second reason you really can't blame Carmelo for not winning a championship. Team dysfunction. Dysfunction has surrounded every organization that Melo has ever been a part of. And, like his selfish label, Anthony has been blamed for that dysfunction, even though Anthony's roles performed on and not off the court. Even his own ex-coach from Denver, George Karl, blamed Anthony as well as many of his teammates in large part for the team's dysfunctions and failures. Karl, in his book Furious George, calls Carmelo a true conundrum. He goes on to insinuate that he had no desire on the defensive end of the floor and that he lacked leadership qualities. Karl would also go on to say that Carmelo, as well as Kenyon Martin, lacked maturity. Saying in his book, Kenyon and Carmelo carried 2 big burdens, all that money and no father to show them how to act like a man. Karl pointed his failing finger at just about everyone on that Nuggets team, from JaVale McGee to J.R. Smith. On February 22, 2011, Carmelo Anthony was traded from the Denver Nuggets to the New York Knicks. In his book, Karl described this trade as a sweet release for the coach and the team, like popping a blister. Kenyon Martin, however, blamed the team's dysfunction squarely on Karl's inability to communicate or motivate his players, and more specifically on his poor coaching as the reason the Nuggets lost to the Lakers in the 2009 Western Conference Finals, including his failure to coach or plan for end-of-the-game situations. We threw the ball away twice, Martin would say. We didn't have an out of bounds. We beat the Lakers if we have an out of bounds. But Martin wasn't the only one who believed it was Carl and the team's general dysfunction that caused their decline. Mostly the dissension between Carl and the Nuggets general manager Kiki Vanderway. Not to mention the injuries, which included the shooting of rookie guard Julius Hodges. It was frustrating, one Nuggets player said about this season's chaos. It was always there, like a cloud. We had high expectations, another Nuggets player said, but the atmosphere all year was real bad. As with the Nuggets organization, Melo next found himself again in the center of attention with the New York Knicks. Over the last 15 years, the Knicks have been arguably one of the most dysfunctional and poorly run franchises in the entire NBA. This is evident when we simply examine the trade the Knicks made to acquire Melo in the first place. At the time, Anthony had 1 year left on his contract. Despite the fact that the Knicks would have likely been able to sign Carmelo in the offseason, they initiated a trade instead. In doing so, they relinquished core players and draft picks, including a 2014 first rounder, which decimated their talent level for years to come, leaving Anthony, once again, the lone and shining star on team after team that lacked the talent needed to win. The ever-present incompetence and mismanagement of the Knicks by their owner James Dolan and its top brass didn't end with that blunder. During Carmelo's tenure in New York, the Knicks would sign multiple former stars, all of whom were in significant decline and seriously out of their prime, including Marcus Camby, Jason Kidd, Rasheed Wallace, and even Melo's former teammate Kenyon Martin. In 2013, in yet another disastrous trade, the Knicks traded Marcus Camby, Steve Novak, their 2016 first-round pick, and 2 future second-round picks for Andrea Bargnani. The Knicks took on Bargnani's $23 million contract and lack of talent on the losing end of one of the worst one-sided trades in NBA history. Often surrounded by misfits and subpar players, Carmelo still found a way to win. And despite a total lack of any real supporting cast, Melo still managed to carry the Knicks to 3 playoff appearances in 2011, 2012, and 2013. And while he never made it past the second round, it's clear that he never had the supporting cast he needed to do so. After years of basketball mediocrity in New York, in 2017 the Knicks would trade Carmelo to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now well out of his prime, Anthony would team up with superstars Russell Westbrook and Paul George, and what was billed as the formation of another Big Three. Of course, the Thunder have their own long history of mismanagement and internal dysfunction. Having drafted 3 of the last 4 players to hold the MVP award, the Thunder have been only able to retain 1, ultimately refusing to pay James Harden's more than reasonable salary demand and shoveling out Kevin Durant, arguably one of the best players in the game, in an attempt to eliminate the on-court bad blood between him and Westbrook. But just like the Knicks, the Thunder paid a significant price to acquire a declining Melo and a post-injury Paul George, dishing out the likes of Victor Oladipo, Domantas Sabonis, Enes Kanter, Doug McDermott, and Chicago's 2018 second-round draft pick that turned into Mitchell Robinson, instantly gutting their talent level and leaving Anthony, Westbrook, and George with an incredibly weak bench. By the time the playoffs rolled around, it was clear that Carmelo was not the player he once was. With their 3 ball-dominant players on the floor, the Thunder had little chemistry and even less playmaking ability. Anthony, a player used to having the ball in his hands, often faded into the background as Westbrook and George dominated the ball. At critical times, his presence was barely even noticeable. Given all that, OKC's Big Three was easily taken down by a sensational rookie and a Jazz team that, well, played like a team, proving once again that in the NBA, chemistry and team basketball is more important than just pure talent. So, no, I don't think we can blame Carmelo Anthony, or his selfish nature, for the fact that he's never been on a championship-winning team. What we can blame instead is the lack of talent, the lack of complementary players, poor coaching, and the general organizational dysfunction that surrounded him. He's the victim in all of this, not the cause. So what about the future of Carmelo Anthony? Well, with his sneakers laced up and his bags packed, Carmelo is on his way to the Houston Rockets. My hope is that he will willingly accept a more limited role with the Rockets, that instead of the focal point, Melo will allow himself to become a significant part of the Rockets' supporting cast. And in doing so, that he will finally win the ring that he so greatly deserves.